Hello, everyone. Welcome to the center seminar. I'm Hans Ausenbaum. You know me all. We are having the second seminar of our seminar series on media, digital communication, and deliberative democracy. It's 11 a.m. in Canberra, as always, or as mostly for the seminar time. It's 9 p.m. in Brazil, where our guest today is Tarek, and where I am as well. So for Canberra, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of Canberra, the Ngunnawal people. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions they make to the life of the city and this region. And we can all take a moment to think about the people who were there before us on the land where we are currently and what they have contributed to the culture in this region. So as I said, it's the second seminar in a special series on media, digital communication, and democracy. And we're delighted to have Tarek Shoker here. Tarek, I'm gonna introduce you and then I'll hand over to you for your presentation. Tarek is a PhD candidate at the doing communication studies at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. He's a member of the Media and Public Sphere Research Group. He's worked on several research projects, such as deliberative systems and social conflict, and the potential of deliberation in divided societies. He's published in several journals, including Political Studies and Political Research Exchange. And of course, we all know Tarek from his visits at the center. He's participated in the summer school. He's been in the summer school. He's also presented in the seminar series before. So in this regard, welcome back. We're happy you're here today, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Hans. I'm very happy to come back, let's say, to present the seminar series of the center. I'm very happy to be in a different stage of my research. So I will start my presentation here. Okay, so my presentation, Hans already introduced me. My name is Tarek Shoker. The last time that I presented, everything was very different, including my name. These 2 years, I transitioned, I changed my research a lot, and now I am finishing my PhD. Today, I will talk about polarized discourses online. It's a part of my PhD research. Previously, when I was in Canberra, I was starting to write an empirical path of my research. I was trying some stuff with my master's data, but nothing was clear. Nothing was, I don't know, very clear for me to decide. But in my stage there, my stage in Canberra, and also when I come back, I could bring more specific research questions and present my research in a better way. So my stage in Canberra was very fruitful for my research. The moment I am now, I am finishing my thesis. So this is the first time that I'm presenting some results. I decided to bring just a small part, just one variable, just one part of it, because it's still very confusing for me. But of course, this is a great moment to present the research, since every feedback is very important to organize the material to submit to journals. So this is a very great moment to present. I'm very grateful to be here now today. So in my research, I just going to present this just as a context of the whole research. I'm dealing with public discussions on Facebook. I'm dealing with two different types of pages, which is media outlet pages and activist pages in different years regarding different topics. And I'm also working with three different variables. But to be more concise, to present something that is more presentable, I choose to bring here just this. Since the beginning, because of the research of my group, I'm very interested in discussions, in everyday political talk, in discussions on social network, online. This is my main interest since the beginning. And since the beginning, I'm also interested in deep disagreements regarding minorities' rights. So these two things didn't change. But since then, I started to read and approach more the problem using the polarization literature. So today I will focus on polarization in discussions on Facebook, two different pages. Just I choose to bring just the abortion discussion to try this presentation with one topic, and then I can include the other two topics. And I also decided to, in this presentation, not bring the data from 2012 and 2013 because of methodological issues. Okay. I have 4 research questions. I will bring this again now, but I'm looking at how the polarizing discourses vary depending of the year, how they vary depending of the side of the debate, and how they vary depending on the type of the page that the discussions take place, which is media and activist pages. And a 4th question is regarding the relationship between polarization and engagement in conversations. So the 4th research question is, if do users present less or more polarizing discourses as they engage in discussions with whom they disagree? So starting, just put everything together here. Traditional measures of political polarization, they capture the ideological positions of politicians, partisans, individuals in general. So, but in recent years, however, political polarization has come to be seen through a relational approach. Polarization is not just about characterizing how groups think, but also about how they relate to each other. Beyond the ideological scale, it matters how individuals and opposing groups treat, view, and interact with one another. There is an aspect of polarization that concerns the attitudes of people and groups, their actions, and how these interactions take place. Using the words of Hetherington, I don't know how to pronounce his name, polarization suggests an intensity that is based on attitudes that people carry out in a profound way. So there's a lot of studies in literature understanding polarization through a relational view, which brings polarization closer to deliberation studies. We see in the last decade different studies using deliberation and polarization, because I think when polarization walks through a relational view, of course, they are more close to us. So through this relational view, if we have two hypothetical contexts, two different societies or two different moments in a single societies, that we have the same ideological scale measured with individuals in general or partisans, we have the same or similar measures. in the ideological scale, but in one of them, we can have a disliked out group, social distance, us versus them discourse, or a lack of interactions, fragmentation. So in the second context, we will have polarization, but not necessarily in the first one. So this is just an illustration of how the relational view of polarization works. How can we understand that? The relationship of polarization in digital platforms. Actually, an important factor in the transformation of polarization from just ideological to also relational is the protagonism of online communication networks as mediators of public disputes. If previously the key indicator of polarization was the ideological positioning, now the interactions on digital platforms and their multiple characteristics are also analyzed. So we have different problems such as informational enclosure, bubble, selective exposure, and others. And of course, these problems exist long before the internet as they speak of our communication as a whole. However, using Brown's words, digital platforms have made these problems more visible, more measurable, and potentially more powerful. So we cannot, scientific research, the evidence regarding these problems and digital platforms, they are actually very ambiguous. So scientific research cannot take for granted the supposedly polarizing mechanisms of digital platforms. Studies of polarization on digital platforms should go beyond network analysis. I mean, if there is or if there is not homophobia, and if there is or if there is not bubble formations, and look at different dimensions of polarization. The discursive dimension is one of these dimensions that we can look at in online polarization. And what I mean by discursive dimension of polarization, there is different studies that try to identify polarizing discourses online. I highlight 3 of them here, but there is other ones. So in this first one, also regarding the abortion discourses, they measure a scale of if a position is extreme, is more or less extreme. So a position is extreme if the position generalize the other group, if they attribute terrorism to the other group, if they wish the death of the other group, and so on. In this other study here, a scale is from, the scale shows the user's attitudes towards other groups, the opponent groups, and the opponent's leaders. And we also have an approach using sentiment analysis, which is not the approach that I choose, but is also a way to analyze the polarizing discourses online. We also have a dialogue here with disagreement studies. Of course, polarizing discourses are not the same thing as disagreement, but there is, for example, this study that I co-author that we differentiate between deep, more deeper or more soft disagreement. Even if they are not the same thing, of course, these kind of disagreement studies, as well as those that I mentioned about polarization, they show how there are scales, levels, or degrees in people's attitudes towards those who think differently. So these attitudes can be identified through the discourses. So here I'm using this category, this variable, to analyze if a discourse is less or more polarizing. The discourse is classified in the position, if this discourse supports or opposes the specific right. Here I'm presenting just the abortion issue. So if the discourse supports the legalization of abortion, or if it opposes, or if it's ambivalent. In the intensity based on the literature of online polarization that I mentioned, the intensity goes from 1 to 3. 1, it's not extreme. The user just presents her or his position. In the 2, there is the discourse is extreme. The user generalize, stereotypes, or insults the outgroup. And we also have the very extreme, where user does not tolerate even the existence of the outgroup. They don't tolerate exist with the outgroup. They wish the outgroup should not exist. The outgroup should isolate itself, and so on. And the combination of the position and intensity can be seen also through a scale. If they combine the two things here, the opposes, and here the support. Okay. So there is also a thing regarding polarization, which is the issue. I'm here, I mentioned this as the issue. In the period between the end of the military dictatorship in Brazil until 2013, although with very important conflicts, Brazil seemed to consolidate its democracy. But from 2013 on, there was a reversal of conditions, using here Brazilian researcher words. During this period, we had events such as the contestation of the results in 2014 presidential elections. We had impeachment of Dilma, and also Jair Bolsonaro elections. Several other aspects have put in check the consolidation of Brazilian democracy, such as the performance of democratic institutions, especially the judiciary, and the establishment and maintenance of political and human rights. One of the issues frequently mentioned in the Brazilian literature in studying this conjuncture is polarization. The concern with Brazilian polarization seemed to make little sense until 2013, until their most important parties was moved progressively towards the center. The problem actually seemed to be the opposite of polarization, the low distinction between parties and the control. And also we had a big group called Centrão that controlled much of the movements of the government and legislators. Polarization comes into play in the post-2013, it started to be a concern, largely due to the climate of intolerance and lack of dialogue between opposing groups. Although the differences between left and right and between conservatives and liberals have not left the scene at any time in our history, of course, they become more fierce and disruptive post-2013, especially if we think about the events such as the 2014 elections, the demonstrations for and against Dilma's impeachment in 2015, 2016, and also the 2018 electoral process where Bolsonaro was elected. Literature on political polarization in Brazil found that the Brazilian right is bigger than in the last decades, at least since the end of the military dictatorship. So this makes us a slightly greater ideological distance between the right and left poles than other times in our recent story. However, these are only a slighter difference in this distance, ideological distance. It is in the relational level that we primarily experience political polarization. There is an unprecedented disaffection of Brazilians for parties and leaders opposed to their preferences, and debates between different groups are largely permeated by incivility and dislegitimation of different positions, points of view. Oh, just another topic here regarding the issue. It's interesting to note that when it comes to ideological positions on specific issues, there is no evidence with quantitative data showing the increasing of polarization. Fuchs and Marx, for example, in this study, they show that in the case of same-sex marriage, the population maintains a certain pattern of division. This is also the truth for abortion. And also, this other study shows that there is no consistent difference between partisan identities when it comes to positions to abortion. So taking into consideration just this kind of study, there is no correlation in partisan identities and abortions, for example. But when it comes to qualitative studies, they show that these same problems, such as same-sex marriage and abortion, they are keys to intense conflict in the public debate between opposing political groups, especially when Bolsonarism starts to characterize a good part of the right. I will skip this part here because I'm taking too long. So going directly to the, I will just say very quickly about this here. I mapped different pages that we could find discussions about the topics that I study. Here I'm talking about specifically about abortion. So I mapped the different pages that could have contents about abortion. I selected the 2 main pages that support, the 2 main pages that oppose it, and the 2 main pages of media. I used a relevance criteria. So the followers, here are the followers of the 6 pages selected. Then I scrapped all posts about abortion from 2012 to 2019, and scrapped all the comments from all these posts. So regarding the abortion discussions, I scrapped something around 1,000 posts and almost 600,000 comments. So this is my sample. I did a stratified random sample with different strata, and I arrived at something close to 100 comments. And for the second phase, which I compare how the same users modify their polarization discourses as they engage in conversation, I also had to collect the other comments of the previous collected users comments. So for this second phase, this was my sample. So regarding the year and the intensity, there is a statistically significant difference between the years in the use of polarizing discourses. Especially here, as I will mention, in 2014 and 2016, the speeches were more polarizing. It's interesting here to see the shift. In 2014, people who opposes abortion were very more polarized, but then they moved together as the years passed. But in 2019, which is good to mention that Bolsonaro is already in power, the supporters they take the lead and were more polarized. What we see is that from 2014 to 2016, the discourses are more polarized about abortion. It's important to mention that Dilma, our former president, was in power, and there is a strong discourse in Brazil in the right wing saying that Dilma defends the abortion. This is very strong. So during this period that Dilma was in power, the discourses were more polarized. And then Dilma suffered the impeachment. So although survey research points to a polarization that was primarily in the 2018 elections, in some issues, we have to mention that the case may be different, as is the case of abortion. It's not in 2018 that we find the most polarizing discourses. Abortion is already an important enclave in Brazil, in Brazilian society. So polarization is not in all the topics a top-down process. It's interesting to note that the supporters of legalization take the lead in polarizing discourses in 2019 as a response to the increase in conservatism in government. We see speeches such as Bolsonarists and other Christians, since they are so conservative, they should leave Brazil. Again, the idea of polarization as a relational phenomenon in which individuals respond and react depending on the communication and political situation. The results regarding the type of page. There is no statistically significant, the two pages, they are not different regarding the comments in the pages are not different regarding the type of page. This is important because the literature of polarization in the internet is becoming more and more concerned with differentiation, spaces, arenas, and platforms. One of the possibilities of these differentiations is less study, is the primary function of a page inside a single platform. The two types of pages are in the same platform, but different functions. Activist pages are often seen as homogeneous environments in which polarizing discourses can more easily be developed. But in this research, at least, as I'm dealing with big pages of activists, there is no evidence of homophily in their interactions. And furthermore, there is no evidence of a difference between media outlet pages and activist pages. Here, regarding the side, there is a statistically significant difference between people who opposes and people who supports the abortion regarding the polarizing discourses. People who opposes are slightly more, the discourse is slightly more polarized. This result partially endorses the argument of some Brazilian authors that polarization here does not happen in a symmetrical, I don't know how to pronounce that word, in a symmetrical way. They say that this is the right that is radicalized, not the left. But although it endorses in some sense, the difference is not big. The difference is small. So there is a strong presence of polarizing discourses in supporters' comments as well. As I mentioned as an example, when in 2019 the supporters' discourses became more polarized. I'll have to run here because I take too long in the beginning. But regarding the fourth research question, regarding the relationship between polarization and intergroup debates, there is a strong literature in the last decade regarding if through intergroup contact, intergroup debates, if people become more or less polarized. Much of this literature take pre and post measures of ideologies, attitudes, and more recently, also measures on the affective dimension. But less studies apprehend this polarization transformation in the debate itself. So it's also necessary, as is done with different other measures. In the online context, the everyday political talk context, we have poor quality of discussions, which is far from the idea of deliberation, but it is possible, empirical studies find justification in some cases, understanding others' perspectives, and position and elaboration. So what happens when people engage in conversation? So I tested just if the users, as they respond more and more to other comments, if their discourses became less or more polarized. So, and there is no statistically significant difference between when someone started, or the second, third, and fourth response, and more than 10. Although we can see when I see the graph, I want to interpret it, but there is no statistically significant relationship. So regarding the discussions in online such social networks, such as Facebook, it's difficult to find evidence of depolarization, as the quality of the discussions is low. But the evidence that I'm showing does not show a significant relationship between the polarizing discourses and the time when the same speaker responds the same thread or discussion. This means that it's not possible to say that the discourses became less or if they became more polarized, depending on how many times the people engage in the same thread responding to other participants. A qualitative evaluation shows that engaged users, those who keep conversation, they sometimes present more polarized discourses and sometimes less as they advance in this discussion, but not depending on how long they stay in it. The relationship seems to lie in the kind of response they are faced with. Sometimes the same user, for example, user A, presents a highly polarizing speech responding to user B, and then when responding to another user C slows down his speech. So there is no, in this study, there's no relationship between these two variables. So final considerations, polarization is not just about the growth of ideological differences. I really like this quote, but also about how these differences are used and how they are interpreted by some actors and groups. This research is important because it helps the efforts to build methods capable of identifying polarizing discourses. It has an interactional dimension. It looks at Facebook discussions, which is more difficult to find since this type of work mostly looks at Twitter because of the API, which is more open and friendlier. And finally, while in the ideological approach to polarization, we often find comparisons between different years or even decades, the same is not true when we're talking about the case of relational approach. Many studies in the relational approach look at specific scenarios or moments where polarization is already in the foreground. So this research provides a midterm analysis and says that it also matters how we got here. And that's it. Thank you very much.